one. It's largely quantitatively driven. We heard that with respect to the MDGs, will be the same largely for the SDGs. So for climate change, particularly for mitigation, that can be simply reduced to a emissions reductions bang for the buck ideology, which then again does very often not allow to look at those small scale off-grid renewable energy access providing technologies and approaching that would be the most beneficial for women's empowerment, including women's economic empowerment in local contexts. So we do need sex disaggregated data. I'm not disputing that, and we do need a quantitative measurement, but we also need to accompany that with qualitative process indicators that are measuring a change of attitude, a change in policy provision, and so on and so forth. And that usually falls completely at the wayside. Now, quickly, and I know I'm running out of time, to the new Green Climate Fund, because I think this is an important opportunity, but again, a threat if we are not succeeding in trying to do things differently. Just to briefly explain, the Green Climate Fund is a new multilateral fund that is set up as part of the so-called financing mechanism of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It has recently received pledges for $10 billion over 4 years, so it's not a minor fund. It actually makes it the largest multilateral climate fund to date. And very importantly, the Green Climate Fund started out through a design process in which civil society was heavily involved, with a governing instrument, a charter that actually recognizes and mandates the need for a gender-sensitive approach to to financing climate action and mitigation and adaptation. So this is very crucial because, again, that's the first fund that is trying to do so, and it also now is on the verge of basically ratifying a gender policy and a gender action plan. But I think this in itself is not enough, and it's particularly not enough because it has the potential to sideline actually the mainstreaming action that we want to see. So I think the efforts of integrating gender considerations and some of the operational policy that deal with measuring results, with the allocation, with how you make investment decisions are probably the more important ones than some specific items that you might put into a gender action plan, which might only get reviewed after 3 or 5 years and maybe not even replicated, and might not have core funding and might have to rely on a gender coordinator somewhere in a secretariat who is pretty isolated and doesn't hold a cloud with the guys that then doing private finance provision or that are actually looking at the structuring of financial instruments. So the integration in the operational policies is where the opportunity but also the challenge are. Just 1 minute, if I can, just quickly, what should civil society advocates do? Because that was the one question that Jenny asked me to address. There are several areas and levels to work demanding accountability through engagement opportunities, and that I think is particularly important for women and women's machineries in recipient countries for funding mechanisms. So that would be the developing countries, is crucial, namely a participation in project preparation in those countries, being part of a country coordinating mechanism that makes decision on what the funding priorities within a countries are for projects and programs to be funded by a fund like the Green Climate Fund, and then an involvement in participatory monitoring to make sure that we have those outcomes. Because you can put anything into an ex-ante impact analysis, but if you don't do the monitoring and the follow-up and allow those people that are affected and are to be beneficiaries of those financing mechanisms to be part of the monitoring efforts, then we are not getting anywhere. Lastly, I think it's also for those of us in the global north and in the developed countries, it's still important to push for the continued provision of finance, including climate finance, additional to the financing needed to fulfill core development objectives, not as a trade-off, not as an either-or. And definitely for a large provision of public finance, because you will have, no matter what kind of private sector engagement strategies you're hoping for, and as much as everybody looks at the private sector, particularly the large private sector institutional investors and so on and so forth, as the savior of the financing dilemma, you will need public core financing to fund those initiatives in adaptation, but also in mitigation, for which there will be no return on investment, or at least not a return on investment sufficient enough to actually satisfy the interest of investors. And with that, I leave it, and I apologize for having run over time.
Deanna, thank you so much. And many of the points you made about some of the challenges around finance for climate would obviously apply to other areas more generally. And you've also set us up really well for our last speaker, Pat Morris, who's going to talk about the role of civil society in pushing these policy issues that the rest of the panel has already laid out. So Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much, and I will try to be quick, even though I'm not sure I can guarantee that. I want to thank you, Jenny, and thank the Gender Program as well as UN Women for the invitation to participate on this panel and to provide input and ideas on this very important topic. Women Thrive Worldwide is a nonprofit organization that works to amplify the voices of women and girls living in poverty, to bring their perspectives and their solutions to decision makers. I wanted to start out, I've been here for the entire week and doing some other talking, and one of the things that I've been suggesting is that we really need to deconstruct some of these terms that we're using. We talk about a number of things interchangeably. We talk about economic opportunities for women, and we sometimes equate that with economic participation for women, and then we also, at times even then, equate both of those with economic empowerment for women. And I want to argue that those are very, very different things. And just because there are opportunities doesn't mean that there's empowerment. Just because women participate in the economy doesn't necessarily mean that there is an empowerment. And I also want to suggest, surprise, surprise, that we can't have empowerment without women's own authentic voice at the table, without us having a market system that really reflects the kinds of solutions that women on the ground would provide and recommend. And so that means that we have to be a lot more in the weeds, a lot more diverse and complex than the goals that we come up with. We have to really look at that. How is this reflected on the ground? There are close to a billion women and girls living in poverty worldwide. Somewhere around 80% of these women and girls grow most of the world's food, do almost all of the care for the young and the elderly, and a host of other unpaid tasks and activities that provide the foundation and the enabling environment for the global market system. Right? Today, the global market system does not necessarily reach these women. Most poor women work outside the formal economy, but she, more than anyone else, knows what needs to be done to change her world for the better. We can tip the balance for her by amplifying her voice and her solutions for the market system. So much of the discussion on so much of the discussion is about how to fit poor women into the market system instead of how do we shape the market system to fit her. And I think that's the question that we need to ask if we are going to have any sort of a sustainable economy in the future, if we're going to end poverty, and if we are going to promote gender equality. Poor women face a host of challenges to full economic participation. Unequal property rights, poor working conditions, gender discrimination, we saw pay discrimination, we saw some of that data, limited leadership roles, lack of access to credit, limited access to markets and clients. And it really sort of says that, to me, that with all of these obstacles, maybe we really need to be rethinking how the global economic system is structured, right? And it also seems to me that now is a good time for us to do that and to not continue to just, have business as usual. At Women Thrive, we work with women's groups, NGOs, women's market associations, women's cooperatives, to help them use their voice to access resources and skills they need to network and advocate for their economic rights. This approach, we think, is central to changing the economic landscape for poor women. For micro entrepreneurs, for female smallholder farmers, for market women. But we have a long way to go to expand the scale, to expand and scale up the inclusion of what I argue is the most high potential people on the face of the earth. A lot of the work that has been, a lot of the work that has been, a lot of the discussion in the past week looking at how we can get more women involved in the economy is really talking about high potential women, and they're talking about business owners, highly educated women, and it seems to me that actually the most high potential women in the world are poor women. They're the most resilient. They know better than anyone else how to weather the storms, all right? And so they can work in an economy that will go up and an economy that will go down. So a large percentage of these women can be found in women's collectives, right? Poor women form and participate in these groups because it amplifies their voice, their leverage, and their ability to affect change in their communities. These collectives also provide or serve as a kind of social safety net for women whom too often are subjected to the exploitation and violence that sometimes accompanies participation in the market system. Let me share an example from our partners in Ghana of a women's collective. In 1997, Lydia Sasu founded the Development Action Association. DAA is an association of rural women farmers and fishers working to reduce poverty and empower groups of women to fully participate in their own development. They work in 54 communities with over 2,000 women. 12 of these collectives are women's fish processing groups. Women Thrive provided on-site advocacy training for them, coaching and mentoring, strategic guidance and key information, introductions to work with, to donors who are on the ground, also facilitated South-South dialogue with other members of our network to assist DAA to refine their advocacy messages and recommendations and solutions to policymakers. DAA is now a local expert on gender and economic development in their communities. They have contributed to Ghana's comprehensive agriculture development plan, to USAID's Feed the Future and other agriculture development plans on the national level. On the local level, the 12 women fishers groups in DAA have also contributed to the development of the industry by bringing their recommendations and solutions to local policy and decision makers. Through their active engagement with local leaders, they advocated for and got local authorities to police illegal commercial fishing that was threatening their livelihoods. They were also successful in getting the authorities to translate fishing regulations into 6 local languages, making it easier for local women to enter the fishing industry. These women know more than anyone what needs to be done to facilitate their full participation in the market system. Their ideas, perspectives, and solutions can change the lives of millions. Women Thrive has conducted a year-long research on what it takes to increase economic opportunities for women living on less than $2 a day. What the research found and what women themselves told us is the following. One, that engaging with women's collectives is key. And I think we see some of that from the example. And second, that seeking and implementing local women's solutions is a necessary condition for sustainable economic development. Poor women play many roles in the market system. They're entrepreneurs, they're employees, they're farmers, they're producers, they're consumers, they're community group leaders. You know, we've been saying, you know, this week that there's a businesswoman in every woman and she votes. You know, she has a say in her community. And too often we think about, you know, women in the economy as people that we can help, as opposed to people who actually can shape what the enabled environment and the political environment looks like, you know, for business to be done. Poor women are very present in the market environment. It is time to acknowledge their presence, their leverage, and the benefits of their participation in the system. We are very, very interested in being able, you know, to work with folks who want to look at this piece, to want to look at